We should also devote serious attention to preventing the deliberate use of diseases as weapons. The Biological Weapons Convention codifies a strong and long-standing norm against the abhorrent use of disease as a weapon, and now has 183 states parties. I urge the 14 states that have not yet joined the convention to do so without any further delay. We also need to strengthen the convention, which lacks an oversight institution and contains no verification provisions, by enhancing its role as a forum for the consideration of preventive measures, robust response capacities, and effective countermeasures. Fortunately, the best counter to biological weapons is effective action against naturally occurring diseases. Strong public and veterinary health systems are not only an essential tool against COVID-19, but also an effective deterrent against the development of biological weapons. All of these issues must be on the agenda next year at the Convention's review conference. At the moment, the Secretary-General's mechanism, established by the General Assembly and endorsed by the Security Council, is the only instrument that provides a framework for an investigation of alleged use of biological weapons. Security Council Resolution 1540 and its follow-ups remain a key component of the international non-proliferation architecture, and are providing an overarching framework to prevent the nightmare scenario of bioterrorism. Given the speed at which pathogens spread in an interconnected world, we must ensure that all countries have resilient and appropriate capacities to respond quickly and robustly to any potential global and deliberate biological event. Excellencies, I'm also concerned that the pandemic is triggering or exacerbating human rights challenges. My call to action for human rights is more relevant than ever and requires robust follow-up. We have seen the excessive use of force to police lockdowns, curfews, and other confinement measures. And there are growing manifestations of authoritarianism, including limits on the media, civic space, and freedom of expression. Populists, nationalists, and others who are already seeking to roll back human rights are finding it in the pandemic a pretext for repressive measures unrelated to the disease. And meanwhile, stigma and hate speech are on the rise. And an epidemic of misinformation online has run rampant. To help counter the spread of untruthful and harmful information, the United Nations has launched the Verified initiative to increase the volume and reach of trusted, accurate information surrounding the crisis. Yet another risk for the long term is the shifting of resources away from gender equality initiatives, education, and other economic sectors. Indeed, this could have intergenerational impacts, including on human rights and participation in political and peace processes. And most immediately, humanitarian needs have surged. More than 1 billion children out of school. More than 135 million people could be on the brink of starvation by the end of this year. Routine immunization services are being disrupted on an unprecedented scale, raising the likelihood of major outbreak of diseases like measles and polio. The already acute vulnerability of refugees and internally displaced persons has grown more pronounced, particularly those living in confined and congested camps and detention facilities. And healthcare workers and humanitarian personnel have themselves been targeted for unconscionable attacks. The health pandemic has fast become a protection crisis. Excellencies, these wide-ranging risks require an urgent and united response, including from the Security Council. 180 members plus one member observer state have endorsed my call for a global ceasefire, as have more than 20 armed movements and other entities and more than 800 civil society organizations. The call yielded some positive results, but these have since expired or in some cases broken down. The Council has an important role to bring its voice and influence to bear on these situations, and I welcome your support expressed in the resolution adopted yesterday. Our peacekeeping operations and special political missions continue to bring hope and stability to all corners of the world, supporting national authorities and vulnerable communities, including by ensuring that missions themselves are not a vector of contagion. We have put in place a number of medical and other support measures to mitigate the spread of the virus within our missions and to protect our personnel. And we have also adapted the positions of our uniformed personnel, for which we are grateful to troop and police contributing countries. The rotations of our uniformed personnel. We are also adapting our tools to the new circumstances. In Colombia and Libya, for example, We have been able to maintain a good level of engagement with the parties and other actors using virtual and other means. The Office of the Special Envoy for Yemen carries out a first-of-its-kind large-scale virtual dialogue with more than 500 Yemenis, 35% of whom are women, on the opportunities and challenges for peace in the country. And through a global humanitarian response plan, we are addressing the most urgent health and humanitarian needs in 63 countries, although the plan is just 21% funded and much more is needed. Excellencies, since the beginning of the crisis, the United Nations family has mounted a comprehensive response, providing medical and material support on the ground, advocating for a global economic and financial rescue package, and offering policy analysis across the key dimensions of the emergency. The pandemic has brought us all to a wide-range reckoning. Collective security and our shared well-being are under assault on many fronts, led by a relentless disease and abetted by global fragilities. Our challenge is to save lives today while buttressing the pillars of security for tomorrow. I remain ready to support the Security Council in any way possible as this body carries out its essential part of the response. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, for your intervention. We understand that you have to leave early. We very much appreciate that on short notice we are ready to join us. I now give the floor to Mr. Peter Maurer.
Mr. Chair, Ministers, Excellencies, thank you for the opportunity to brief you and to address you today. Conflict zones are the sharp end of pandemics. Communities are already living on a knife edge where additional shocks can be catastrophic. The ICRC is seeing firsthand how COVID-19 and its economic aftershock are deepening fragility, spiking humanitarian needs, accentuating the impact of violence and conflict, opening the doors to alarming levels of stigmatization, increasing global poverty, heightening instability and tensions, and reversing hard-won development gains. It is clear that pandemics cannot be addressed solely as a health issue. Instead, the precondition is a political environment which supports health systems, social supports, and humanitarian action, simultaneous emergency and development approaches, as well as fundamental change of behavior of belligerents in conflict. Unquestionably, pandemics are changing humanitarian work. We already know that needs are vast and growing. According to our legal analysis, there are now around 100 armed conflicts around the world, involving 60 states and more than 100 non-state armed groups as parties to those conflicts. This represents a steady rise in the total number of classified conflicts over the recent decades. ICRC is drawing lessons from the impact of COVID-19 across these conflicts, as well as the experiences of other infectious diseases like Ebola, cholera, or tuberculosis. Today, I bring to your attention 6 essential lessons for a pandemic response in humanitarian settings. Firstly, international humanitarian law must be better respected to protect civilians and their infrastructure from multiple future shocks, including pandemics. Violations of IHL, cities bombed to rubble, mass displacements, often the consequences, are the enemy of pandemic response. Countries where health services have been destroyed by war stand little chance to treat or contain COVID-19. Emergency room mortality rates are spiking dramatically. Attacks, including cyber attacks on healthcare workers and facilities, are continuing unabatedly. Health workers and humanitarians are our first and last lines of defense, and they must be protected. Words and promises, resolutions like 2286, which has been agreed by this Council, are fruitless if they do not result in meaningful changes of behaviors on the ground. Positive influence by those who have leverage over parties to conflict must be a priority. ICRC is doing our share by training millions of health workers around the world on implementing protective measures, fighting stigma, and maintaining neutral and impartial services in the midst of war and violence. Secondly, Assistance and protection must be available to all those in need without the threat of politicization or manipulation. Under international law, impartial humanitarian aid cannot come with strings attached to be withheld from so-called enemy groups. People's needs are the only reasonable basis on which to respond. Misinformation and exclusionary responses can fuel unrest and instability. Today, the distribution of scarce medicine and protective materials are triggering violent flare-ups. Tomorrow, the inequitable distribution of any COVID-19 vaccine could destabilize communities. The Red Cross and Red Crescent movement has joined the UN Secretary General in calling for a people's vaccine, which ensure no one is left out. Once vaccines will be available, their equitable distribution will be critical. We are working to plan with states and with millions of Red Cross and Red Crescent workers all over the world to help to mitigate against potentially very dangerous situations when vaccines will be available. Thirdly, the response must go far beyond health needs and mitigate the wider secondary impacts of pandemic. Pandemic response cannot be reduced to the delivery of masks or confined to emergency rooms. Communities need measures to guard against the multiple dimensions of fragility, health and sanitation systems, social safety nets, and livelihoods. There are no silver bullets, but where people are hit by double burden of conflict and disease, context-specific, evidence-driven approaches will balance the imperatives of controlling infectious disease and mitigate against secondary impacts. I warn against compartmentalization of the response into humanitarian or development action. We must enable emergency and long-term responses, preventive and curative responses in sync, and it is possible. ICRC has seen a growing recognition that inhumane conditions, for example, in detention or displacement camps, can become deadly during a pandemic, not only for those interned and incarcerated, but for the host communities. In detention facilities in more than 50 countries, the ICRC is working with the authorities to strengthen healthcare and hygiene measures. We have seen such measures effectively prevent the spread of cholera and Ebola in places of detention in Guinea, Liberia, and the DRC a couple of years ago. By responding to health needs, it's possible to improve inhumane conditions for longer term and diffuse rising tensions in communities. The ICRC has delivered more than 200 confidential reports to authorities concerned over the past few months on the conditions in detention facilities, made recommendations on system-wide improvements, covering health, sanitation, hygiene services, overcrowding, family contact, ill treatment, and judicial processes. We commend the many authorities worldwide who have responded positively to our recommendations and who have prevented a degradation of their security environment. Fourthly, responses must be built to reach the most vulnerable and marginalized community members. No one is safe from a pandemic until everyone is safe. Pandemics will affect some people more than others. We must ensure responses reach those less visible and silenced. For example, displaced people, those working in the informal sector, those in areas controlled by non-state armed groups, people detained, people with disabilities, the elderly, racial minorities, women and girls, as well as sexual and gender minorities. We must look at the landscape of needs rather than creating trade-offs between the COVID response and other responses. The war-wounded, those with chronic diseases must still be treated. Mental health and sexual violence responses must be scaled up to dramatically increased needs. Livelihood assistance and other social supports must be boosted as a critical preventive measures. Failure to do so will nurture the cycle of exclusion, violence, and conflict. Fifthly, we must proactively guard against any rollback of civilian protections. Government must not exploit a pandemic and set draconian precedents which undermine international humanitarian law and human rights law. Any exceptional measures to fight and contain the pandemic must be time-bound, non-discriminatory, and proportional to public health needs. We urge wider implementation of the good practices of granting exceptions to humanitarians whenever possible. Humanitarian organizations are ready to do their job and their part for additionally precautionary measures in that work. Given the mistrust and heightened tensions in areas of violence and conflicts, states need to be especially vigilant to ensure that laws restricting the use of force are thoroughly applied. This should be followed through to ensure rules of conduct and training are in place, as well as robust oversight of security forces. Checks and balances must be in place so emergency measures such as lockdowns or wide-scale data collection are not used as abusive tools to control populations or undermine public trust in health measures. Temporary restrictions on humanitarian access must not become fixed. And finally, responses will only be effective if there is community trust and engagement. The global COVID response is a game changer for state citizens' trust. Healthcare at gunpoint is futile. Even in conflict-affected environments, local authorities can build trust by listening to communities and acting with transparency. Responders also need to be trusted and stigma combated. ICRC, together with the Red Cross and Red Crescent movement and its existing community networks, is often one of the few responders in contested areas. We see there is no substitute for neutral and impartial humanitarian action which secures the trust of populations and the trust of authorities across front lines and the so-called last mile of service delivery. Trust can be achieved by listening to the plight of communities, by walking the talk, by engaging and cooperating with local leaders and faith-based organizations and religious leaders. On the front lines of fighting the pandemic, the convergence of health and security is not a matter of political debate, but of simple and experienced truth. Colleagues, even in these uncertain times, we have the knowledge and the lessons on how to tackle COVID-19. Much can be done in this Council and beyond. The passing of UN Security Council Resolution 2532 represents a chance to reset, to translate the consensus reflected in the text into greater cooperation and action to protect civilians. The choices are there. Choose to respect the ceasefire, choose to intensify diplomacy to make it happen, choose to enable humanitarian access, including facilitating movement, choose to follow the laws you created in international humanitarian law, choose to give space to first responders and local communities. Millions around the world are depending on you to make the right choices that protect them from the health crises of the future. I thank you.
I thank Mr. Maurer for his briefing, and let me say thanks, Peter, for your important work, especially in times like these. And now let me first say hello to all and apologize for being late. We had a technical problem, but now we are online and it's good to see you all. Thanks to Ambassador Heusgen for leading us through the first minutes of this meeting. And now let's go on, dear colleagues. Now I give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Amira El-Fadil, Mohamed El-Fadil.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you to the German presidency for inviting the African Union, members of the Council. Good evening from Addis Ababa, the headquarters of the African Union. Excellencies, as we speak today, the situation, the epidemiological situation in Africa is as follows. We have 418,000 infected cases. We have 10,400 deaths. We have 198,000 recoveries. We continue to be the least affected continent, but that doesn't mean that the risk is less than the rest of the world. The risk is still very high in Africa. We are still looking to countries that have not yet go into the spike. Excellencies, the African Union heads of states and governments under the chairmanship of the President of South Africa, the chair of the African Union, they have decided in their meeting on the 26th of March that Africa will act together. Africa will fight COVID-19 together in solidarity and in unity. And they agreed also that the African Union will lead this fight by the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention, which is our specialized technical institution at the African Union. So what we are doing now in the African Union, we are leading the continent, we are leading in the fight against COVID-19 as being decided by the Bureau of the Assembly. Excellencies, we acted together as African Union, but I can say that we have started early because when we convened the meeting of the Ministers of Health, which is an emergency meeting on the 22nd of February, it was only 1 week after the first case was reported in the continent. So we tried as Africa to work together and to act quickly, and we managed to adopt our joint continental strategy on COVID-19. It was adopted by the Ministers of Health, but later endorsed by the Bureau of the Assembly. We have early also worked with our member states to identify the gaps we have in Africa. We have fragile health systems in many of our African member states. So the first thing we did is in the area of diagnostics. We realized that at the beginning of this pandemic, we have only 2 laboratories that have the capability to diagnose COVID-19. So the first thing we did is we trained the lab technician. We built the capacity of our member states. Now, almost all of our member states, they have the capacity to diagnose. And this for us is one of the successes we managed to do in a very short time. We continue to build the capacity of our member states. We continue to do the online training because of the measures taken, like the lockdowns and the stopping of the mobility. We are using internet. We are continuing with the training and the capacity building of the health professionals in our member states. And also we have tried to resolve the issue of the budget, because also budget is a challenge. Having enough financial resources to fight COVID-19 was a challenge. That's why our also leaders, they decided to establish the anti-COVID-19 response fund. The fund was established and member states, they made pledges. In one meeting, there is $61.5 million pledges made. But also I would like to thank all of the partners and the member states who also mobilized and made pledges to our fund. And I don't want to name countries, but many of your countries, they are also part of the resource mobilization in Africa. They are part also of the pledges made to Africa. And also we decided on a pool procurement processes. And we established an electronic medical platform. It was established by the private sector of Africa. Now all our member states, they have the opportunity to buy from the manufacturers, because through this platform, we have identified the manufacturers, we have negotiated the prices, because as you know, Excellencies, that very few medical items are produced locally in Africa. The majority of the items that's needed for the fight of COVID-19 are not manufactured in the continent. And that's why we have established this pool procurement electronic platform, and the private sector is involved heavily in this, and they were assigned by President Ramaphosa to do this job, and they did it very well. And now our member states, they can access the platform and they can buy the medical products they need to buy, and also with best prices they can get. Excellencies, also we have briefed our Peace and Security Council here at the African Union. The Peace and Security Council convened 5 meetings since the beginning of this pandemic. They are very supportive to our effort in the Department of Social Affairs and Africa CDC. And also they have instructed the Air Force in member states to support our efforts by lifting and deploying the rapid responders. We are sending from the headquarters, and we are sending from DRC, those who are working on fighting Ebola in DRC. We are now using them. We are sending them to member states. We have sent rapid responder to 12 member states, and we got the support of our Peace and Security Council here at the African Union. Excellencies, also, we have also joined the call at the African Union. We have joined the call made by the Secretary General on the global ceasefire to reduce the effect of the conflict and on COVID-19, and Africa and African Union, we joined this call. We called upon member states in Africa and all those who are carrying guns, especially this year, 2020, for us in the African Union is a year of silencing the guns in Africa. We are calling upon them to cease fires because one of the tools, the effective tools we are using and it's being used globally to fight this COVID-19 is to do more testing. And we have launched a PACT initiative, which is partnership to accelerate testing in Africa. The problem is in the conflict zone areas, we cannot access these areas to do the testing. And that's increase the risk for the people in this area. Also, we are also very much concerned about the human rights of those people that are in the vulnerable situations, migrants, refugees, IDPs, accessibility to all these populations to have to be covered by the response we are doing, to be covered by the response that being done on the level of the member states, to be part of the testing. It's really a very big challenge. That's why we need the collaboration of all of you. We need the collaboration of ICRC, and also we need the specialized agencies like IOM and UNHCR to be with us to make sure that these populations that are in vulnerable situations, they can be covered by the activities we are doing as an African Union. So we need the support in this area. Excellencies, also one of the areas that we are working on is fighting gender-based violence, and it's been mentioned also in the statement by the Secretary General. There is an increase in the domestic violence. There is an increase in the violence against children because also of the impact of this COVID-19, the psychological and mental impact, also because of people staying at home, the socioeconomic impact of this COVID-19, that people are losing their jobs, they are losing their incomes. So these all challenges is reflecting itself in an increased domestic violence, and this is one of the areas we are working also with our partners, we are working with our member states to address these issues and to make sure that our communities and our people, they will be more aware, they will be helped and supported to minimize the risk on the women and children. Excellencies, I would like also to share with you that we are working on the area of development of vaccines. We don't want our continent to be left behind if a vaccine is developed. There is clinical trials here and there in Africa, in a few countries on the continent, but also we know that globally there is many clinical trials going on, and any minute a vaccine can be developed and can be licensed. So we want to raise our voices loudly to say that we don't want Africa to be left behind. We want the vaccine to be for everybody, accessible, affordable to everybody, because this pandemic, if it's not over in every part of the globe, it will not be considered over. So for everybody to be safe, we have to make sure that everybody will have the opportunity to access the vaccines. We had in the past experiences that vaccines has been developed. It took many years for these vaccines to be accessible to the African population. So this time we are talking early. Our leaders have joined the global efforts. They were part of the Gavi Summit. We were part of all the events that been held to speak about vaccines, and we want to make sure that Africa will have an accessibility to the vaccine if vaccines are developed. At the end of my remarks, Excellencies, I would like to say that we are doing our best in the continent. We are doing the maximum possible in our capacity as member states of Africa, as an African Union. We have a very clear vision on what we want to do. We have our mechanisms in place. We have our ministerial coordinating committees. We have our task force that's working daily, coordinating all the efforts on the level of the continent. And we have pooled our resources to make sure that Africa will win this fight against the COVID-19. But what we need more support we need this solidarity that we are experiencing as Africa. We want it to be a global solidarity. We want to join the efforts of the globe to make sure that we will do this fight together. We want also not to be left behind. If a vaccine is developed, we want not to be left behind. If a medication also is approved, we are working very closely with WHO. We are aligning our policies with WHO policies, and we are working very closely also on the ground. Excellency, thank you very much again for inviting the African Union, and we commit ourselves to be working with you very closely to silence the guns in Africa and to make sure that peace will prevail in the continent. Thank you very much.
I thank Ms. El Fadil for her briefing very much. And now I give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Jean-Yves Le Drian, Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs of France. But first, I would like to take this opportunity again to pay tribute to France and thank my colleague Jean-Yves Le Drian for their excellent presidency during the month of June. Un grand merci. Et Jean-Yves, vous avez la parole.
Merci Eiko, merci monsieur le Président, monsieur le Président du CICR, Madame la Commissaire de l'Union africaine, mes chers collègues, Mesdames et Messieurs, je souhaiterais d'abord remercier mon ami Eiko Maas d'avoir pris l'initiative d'organiser cette réunion en début de la présidence allemande du Conseil de sécurité. Je tiens également à saluer et à remercier le secrétaire général des Nations Unies, le président du CICR et la commissaire de l'Union africaine pour le travail remarquable de leurs organisations respectives afin de surmonter collectivement cette crise sanitaire sans précédent. Le Conseil de sécurité, qui assume en vertu de la Charte des Nations Unies la responsabilité principale du maintien de la paix et de la sécurité internationale, nous venons de célébrer le 75e anniversaire, il doit prendre en compte l'effet déstabilisateur des pandémies. Il l'a fait en 2000 avec le sida, il l'a fait en 2014 et en 2018 avec Ebola, et c'est bien ainsi. Je me réjouis par ailleurs qu'il ait pu, à l'unanimité et à travers la résolution qu'il a adoptée hier à l'initiative de la Tunisie, dont je salue le ministre Nourdine Herré, à l'initiative aussi de la France, je me réjouis qu'il ait pu répondre à la menace que fait peser la pandémie de Covid-19 sur la paix et la sécurité internationale. Nous devons maintenant redoubler d'efforts ensemble pour mettre en œuvre cette résolution. La France soutient l'appel du secrétaire général à un cessez-le-feu appuyé par près de 180 pays, par plus de 20 groupes armés, ainsi que de nombreuses organisations régionales et de la société civile. Cet appel-là doit aussi se traduire en actes. Et en Syrie, au Yémen, en Libye, au Sahel ou encore en Afghanistan, la situation reste extrêmement instable et les populations civiles continuent d'en payer le prix. Je tiens aussi à saluer le travail remarquable des casques bleus dans des conditions parfois très difficiles. Nous devons collectivement soutenir les opérations de maintien de la paix en leur permettant de mettre pleinement en œuvre leur mandat. La France a récemment déployé une équipe de décontamination au sein de la FINUL au Liban afin d'apporter une expertise et un soutien technique dans la lutte contre la pandémie. Et nous sommes prêts à accueillir dans nos hôpitaux militaires des soldats étrangers engagés en opération de paix, malades de la Covid-19 et nécessitant des soins urgents. Sur le plan humanitaire, je souhaite aussi rendre hommage au travail mené par les personnels humanitaires et médicaux, notamment le personnel du CICR. La France, tant par son appui bilatéral que sa mobilisation dans les enceintes internationales, a répondu présente et restera pleinement active dans les semaines et les mois à venir. Nous devons ensemble continuer à soutenir la pleine mise en œuvre du plan global de réponse humanitaire à la Covid-19 dans tous ses éléments, ce qui inclut le soutien apporté aux déplacés internes, aux réfugiés, ainsi que la défense des droits et de la santé sexuelle et reproductive des femmes qui sont en première ligne de la réponse aux pandémies et dont les droits doivent être préservés et renforcés. Ce sera l'un des objectifs du Forum Génération Égalité qui sera organisé en France au premier semestre 2021 en partenariat avec le Mexique et ONU Femmes. Cela constituera la prochaine grande étape internationale pour la promotion des droits de la femme. Tout doit également être fait pour faciliter l'accès humanitaire aux populations vulnérables et pour s'assurer que les personnels humanitaires et médicaux ainsi que leurs infrastructures ne font pas l'objet d'attaques. À cet égard, il nous faut poursuivre notre mobilisation en faveur du respect du droit international humanitaire. C'est le sens de l'appel à l'action humanitaire porté par la France et l'Allemagne dans le cadre de l'Alliance pour le multilatéralisme avec l'appui du CICR, et cet appel a été soutenu par 45 États. Nous devons également renforcer l'accès à une information fiable et lutter plus efficacement contre les fausses rumeurs, les infodémies et les discours de haine qui peuvent prospérer sur les peurs collectives dans un contexte de crise mondiale. Enfin, nous ne pouvons ignorer l'impact socio-économique considérable de cette crise. Les causes profondes des conflits n'en seront qu'aggravées: renforcement des inégalités, perte de confiance dans les institutions, tensions dans la répartition des ressources naturelles, désorganisation ou rupture des chaînes d'approvisionnement, crise climatique. Nous portons à cet égard une responsabilité collective, celle de repenser le monde d'après et d'atténuer autant que possible les conséquences économiques et sociales de cette crise. Pour cela, l'agenda 2030 et l'accord de Paris sur le climat doivent demeurer notre cadre de référence. En effet, cette crise est venue confirmer, s'il en était besoin, la pertinence des objectifs de développement durable en soulignant combien l'interaction peut être forte entre les enjeux de santé et les enjeux environnementaux. Nous avons également besoin d'une architecture multilatérale de santé adaptée aux défis d'aujourd'hui. Cela suppose en particulier de renforcer au sein de l'OMS, seule organisation de santé publique universelle, notre capacité d'alerte collective pour être à même de régler très rapidement des crises d'envergure mondiale. Cela requiert également que les États exercent pleinement leurs responsabilités pour garantir la mise en œuvre effective du règlement sanitaire international qui fait encore trop souvent défaut. Il nous faut aussi travailler au renforcement des systèmes nationaux de santé et de leur résilience. Il nous faut poursuivre nos efforts pour faire de la couverture santé universelle une réalité, autant de chantiers auxquels nous devrons nous atteler en tirant toutes les leçons de la crise que nous traversons. Nous l'avons rappelé le 26 juin dernier avec EICOMAS lors de la dernière réunion de l'Alliance pour le multilatéralisme. Seul un multilatéralisme fort permettra de surmonter ensemble ces nouveaux défis. Être multilatéraliste, ce n'est ni être dogmatique, ni être idéologue. C'est plaider pour la seule méthode efficace, car il n'y a pas d'alternative à l'unité et à la coopération pour répondre à nos problèmes communs, et la France est déterminée à continuer à œuvrer dans ce sens. Je vous remercie.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Le Drian for his statement. Merci beaucoup, Jean-Yves. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Noureddin Erey, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Tunisia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Permettez-moi tout d'abord de féliciter mon ami le ministre Jean-Yves, Monsieur le secrétaire général des Nations Unies et tous les membres du Conseil de sécurité pour l'adoption à l'unanimité de la résolution historique 2532, initiée par la Tunisie et la France. Mr. President, let me first congratulate you on assuming the presidency of the Security Council in July. Wish you all success and ensure you of our full support. We thank Germany for convening this high-level open debate on pandemics and security. I welcome the Secretary General, thank him for his briefing, and commend his leadership in mobilizing the UN system and the international community in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I thank also the President of the International Committee for the Red Cross and the representative of the African Union for their briefings. Mr. President, with the outbreak of COVID-19 pandemic, the world has clearly embarked on a volatile and unstable new phase. For the first time in living memory, humanity is confronting a common threat, and it must defeat collectively. Since the early weeks of the pandemic, at the initiative of Tunisia and France, and with the support and the help of the E10, Council members started working on a draft resolution to address the impact of COVID-19 on issues under its mandate. As we all know, the process was long and difficult. We all tried hard to beyond our divergent view and concerns. And just yesterday, July 1st, we finally managed to prioritize the interest of the international community. This resolution, even though adopted after a delay of 3 months, bears an important message that consensus is possible should there be a political will. A message of hope and renewed faith in multilateralism. I take this opportunity to congratulate all Security Council members for the unanimous adoption of important resolution and thank them for their support and constructive engagement. In this regard, Tunisia shares the Secretary General assessment concerning the impact of this pandemic on peace and security. As outlined in his statement before his Council on 9th April 2020, my country fully supports all the initiatives and measures he proposed to mitigate the potential impact of the pandemic, especially in the conflict-affected areas, in particular his appeal for an immediate global ceasefire and the launching of the global humanitarian response plan for COVID-19 by the UN. At the same time, we commend the leading role of the UN system in coordinating the global response to COVID-19, and we support in this regard the central contribution of the World Health Organization to these efforts. Mr. President, the COVID-19 pandemic has reversed our assumption about the current world order. It is telling us that the hierarchy of global security threats is changing rapidly, and we are dealing with new global enemies, and that no country, no matter how developed it is, will be immune from its impact. Obviously, we can expect the impact of even more devastating in less developed countries and on vulnerable populations. Tunisia profoundly believes that we will not be able to defeat this pandemic in each of our countries without solidarity and unity, and the international, regional, and national levels. Solidarity because no one of us can face this huge challenge alone. Unity because the virus will use all weaknesses in our local, national, and international system to spread and kill. We should never forget that no one is immune until everyone is immune. Beyond the heavy death toll of more than 500,000 persons and immediate health consequences of the pandemic, the global economy is heading towards another Great Depression. As food supplies are coming under strain, prices are getting higher, and employment is rising, especially in fragile societies or less developed countries. This will translate into food insecurity and could quickly escalate to political unrest, violence, and conflict. Tensions are already flaring around the world, are not just in war zones. In conflict settings, the situation could be even more worse. The uncertainty created by the pandemic encouraged some actors to promote further division and turmoil, leading to escalation of violence and disastrous consequences on civilians and vulnerable persons, especially internally displaced persons and refugees. I take this opportunity to pay tribute to all UN troops in peace operations, as well as to humanitarian actors and relief persons providing support to contain the pandemic and to ensure unhindered delivery of humanitarian assistance to these vulnerable populations, sometimes risking their lives in pandemic context. In conclusion, Mr. President, as we commemorate the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, it is important to recognize that humanity is witnessing nowadays new types of threats to international peace and security, emanating not only from pandemics, but also from climate change and cyber criminality. As the nature and scope of threats evolve, we need to rethink security, adapt our approaches and tools. It's clear that we cannot face such dangers using the same instrument we have inherited from the old times. A change of paradigm is highly needed. Tunisia strongly believes that the Security Council needs to discuss these issues more in depth to be able to deliver on its primary responsibility for maintenance of international peace and security. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your statement. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Omar Saru, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Estonia. Omar, the floor is yours.
Mr. President, first of all, I congratulate France for a great presidency and also Germany for assuming the presidency of this council in July. And let me first express my full sympathy and solidarity with all the people and nations of the world suffering from the coronavirus. The coronavirus crisis has demonstrated how crucial multilateral cooperation is to our collective health, prosperity, and security. And unfortunately, it seems likely that we are to remain seized with this crisis for quite some time. Thus, the global security implications of the coronavirus disease must remain under our close and constant scrutiny. It is truly important that the Security Council finally agreed upon a resolution on coronavirus, and this must be seen as a unified and clear call to put the guns down now. I thank particularly France and Tunisia for their leadership on this matter, and this confirms that also this Council must remain regularly involved with the peace and security implications of the virus. It also means that we shall listen to the wise advice and observations of the Secretary General, and allow me to congratulate Mr. Guterres also for being a visible and vocal voice of the UN nations family during this ongoing crisis. The virus outbreak has clearly highlighted how crucial it is to have a safe and reliable digital infrastructure, that we must collectively work towards a more stable and secure cyberspace. Since the start of the pandemic, we are observing with worry an increase in attacks against one of the most important infrastructure sector, hospitals. Actors that use cyberspace for malicious purposes will be investigated, and these attacks will not remain unnoticed. We raised the cybersecurity topic at the UN Security Council ARIA Formula meeting in May, where the majority of participating states reaffirmed their commitment to follow commonly agreed rules of responsible state behavior in cyberspace, and we should all remain seized with this topic also in the future. The ongoing global pandemic has revealed serious risks brought by uneven digital transformation and weak digital infrastructure. The global digital divide must be rapidly addressed by all of us, including the private sector, which can drive the necessary innovation. That is why Estonia and the United Arab Emirates will cooperate to organize a global business summit to involve the business sector in addressing grave effects of the coronavirus disease. Digital technology and digital development can make societies more resilient to the outside shocks we are living through right now. And that is why Estonia, together with Singapore, convened yesterday an international high-level meeting on the global digital divide and COVID-19. And we also launched a global declaration on digital response to coronavirus there.
And this text remains open for co-sponsorship, and more than 30 countries have already joined it. And I hope to welcome many, many more. Dear colleagues, while being busy with the ongoing crisis, we should also make sure that people get accurate and science-based information about the coronavirus disease. The Secretary General has wisely said that we shall be flooding the public, and I quote, with facts and science while countering the growing scourge of misinformation, a poison that is putting even more lives at risk. Thus, it is important that our response to the pandemic would not hamper the free flow of information. We can only succeed when the freedom of expression and the role of free, independent, and pluralistic media, online and offline, is secured. Failing here, we fail with our responses. To abandon facts is to abandon freedom. These are the words by Professor Timothy Snyder from US. We observe with concern how the global pandemic is used as a pretext to call for the termination of sanctions or to impede access to humanitarian aid. We called for unimpeded humanitarian access in Syria, where all arguments not to extend and widen the UN cross-border aid mechanism in July don't correspond to the reality on the ground. We regret to see that in some areas the pandemic is used as a pretext to curb peacekeepers' freedom of movement by accusing them in spreading the virus. We must ensure that all responses to coronavirus disease are in full compliance with international law, including international humanitarian law. To conclude with, the current crisis and past pandemics have shown that it takes a coordinated global effort to roll back global suffering. If coronavirus is left to ravage those with weaker healthcare systems, it will soon spread back to the other countries. This is a reality. We are only as strong as the weakest link in the global health system. Thank you very much.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Reinfeldt for his statement. Thank you very much, Omas. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Lord Tariq Ahmad of Wimbledon, Minister of State for the Commonwealth, the United Nations and South Asia of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. President. Heiko, it's lovely to see you again and join you all for this important meeting. And we wish you well for your presidency of the Security Council. And it is important that we convene together to discuss this subject. And in doing so, I join others in paying tribute, particularly at this time of a global pandemic, to the leadership of the Secretary General, and thank ICRC President Mr. Maura and Mrs. El-Fadil Mohammed for their very helpful and constructive briefings this morning. We all know that with COVID-19, we face a crisis of unprecedented scope and indeed complexity. Across the world, it has triggered health, humanitarian, economic development and security challenges, with ramifications that are both immediate and indeed long-term. These challenges are interwoven. They require a coordinated, collaborative response. Therefore, may I first welcome the adoption unanimously of UN Security Council Resolution 2532 yesterday, and doing so wish to thank both France and Tunisia for their efforts in this respect. Mr. President, the full extent of this pandemic is still unfolding before our eyes. I know we all fear its impact as it spreads into states that are both vulnerable or affected by conflict. As we see around the world in places such as Yemen, Libya, and the Central African Republic, contested or fragmented government authority severely restricts local capacity to respond effectively to the spread of this pandemic. Health systems are overstretched and under-resourced and cannot detect and indeed monitor the spread of the disease. As the impact becomes clearer, so we see evidence of COVID compounding existing problems, such as in the Lake Chad Basin and in the Sahel. Our efforts to prevent or resolve conflict there are complicated by COVID-19. Peacekeepers themselves are quarantined. Humanitarian access is restricted and impeded, and peace processes have been paused. So it is important we must both act to tackle the pandemic and to give an effective response to prevent or resolve conflict. We must ensure a strong international health response led by the World Health Organization. And in this regard, the United Kingdom has already committed £764 million to support humanitarian and public health needs. We must ensure development and equitable distribution of a vaccine. And in this regard, the United Kingdom has already pledged over £300 million in funding for research into vaccines, tests and treatment. And as many of you know, last month, we hosted a very successful global vaccine summit that raised over $8.8 billion to support immunization of 300 million children against coronavirus and indeed other vaccine-preventable diseases. At the same time, we must of course redouble our efforts on peace and security. This Council, the Security Council, has a key role to play. We welcome the Secretary-General's call for a global ceasefire, and we should all stand firm on our peacekeeping troop contributions and, importantly, the resources they need. The devastating impact of COVID-19 on fragile societies underlines the moral duty of outside parties that influence conflicts in Syria and indeed elsewhere. Importantly, everyone must come together to support peace. We need to also act smartly to prevent new peace and security crises from emerging. The pandemic has clearly demonstrated the importance of the coordinated and multi-dimensional international responses for which the UK has long argued. The United Nations must work smarter across its pillars and with partners. And we commend the UN system for delivering pressure. But clearly, I think we all acknowledge that more is needed to deliver that limits instability of complex. We therefore recommend 3 actions. Firstly, UN responses must be more sensitive to conflict risk and build this into strategic planning, prioritization and financing. Secondly, there needs to be a joint risk assessment and planning with the international financial institutions to combine macroeconomic, social and political considerations. And thirdly, we need to focus on what works to build a country's resilience to shocks. Strong, inclusive and accountable institutions, the rule of law, good governance and human rights are the fundamental basis of that very resilience. We need to see this in our coordinated response and in our planning to build back better. Mr. President, this pandemic has brought into sharp focus the urgent needs, the development objectives and sustainable peace and security cannot be solved as separate issues, and they cannot be solved alone. Together, we have this expertise. Together, we have the resources. We must use them and respond to this challenge, and together we will succeed. Thank you.
I thank His Excellency Lord Ahmad for his statement. Thank you very much, Tariq. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Tu Anh Sung, the Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs of Vietnam.
Mr. President, I would like to sincerely thank the German presidency for organizing this open debate on pandemics and security, and the UN Secretary General and other briefers for their comprehensive briefings. Over the past month, the COVID-19 pandemic has spread across the globe, both in intensity and scope, and left far-reaching implications on every aspect of international situation. This greatest challenge ever to the United Nations has vividly shown us how a global health crisis and non-traditional security threats to a larger extent could instill profound consequences on peace, security, and prosperity of every member state. No single country can win this war against COVID-19 unless and until everyone wins. At this critical juncture, we should spare no efforts to strengthen international solidarity and cooperation towards promptly response to pandemics and sustainable socio-economic recovery. Multilateral institutions, particularly the United Nations at the center, could play a pivotal role in leading and coordinating global efforts. Mr. President, to promote the corresponding role of the Council, our delegation wishes to make the following points. First, protecting health and lives of our people, particularly the most vulnerable from impacts of pandemics, remain the utmost priority and indeed the primary responsibility of every state. We therefore call on all parties to conflicts to heed the Secretary General call for an immediate global ceasefire and facilitate humanitarian activities to combat with the COVID-19 pandemic. Within its mandate, the Council should send a strong message to resonate this appeal and take every action needed to help de-escalate tension, build trust, reconcile, and promote peaceful dialogues towards lasting conflict settlement. In this connection, we welcome the adoption of the Security Council Resolution 2532 and appreciate France and Tunisian leadership and determination in promoting the initiative to which Vietnam has actively and constructively contributed. Second, the Council should closely monitor and instruct UN peacekeeping mission and special political mission in collaboration with UN country team and specialized agencies, particularly the World Health Organization, to ensure safety, security, and health of all UN personnel on the field, and to effectively assist host countries to deal with this pandemic and prepare for the future infectious disease outbreaks. Vietnam commends our ongoing efforts of UN peace mission and other UN agencies, as well as the first-line responders in the fight against coronavirus. Third, we strongly support the UN Secretary General appeal to waive sanctions and can undermine countries' capacity to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. We also encourage the Council and Member States to work out appropriate measures to facilitate humanitarian assistance to countries under sanction to enable them to address this overwhelming health crisis more efficiently in the best interest of civilian population. Agencies, being fully aware of hazard of the pandemic, Vietnam has taken very early action against it. On the basis of whole of government approach, we have achieved encouraging initial results in keeping the pandemic under control and return to normal socio-economic activities. As the 2020 ASEAN Chair and a non-permanent member of Security Council, Vietnam has put forth initiatives and joint efforts in coordinating regional and international response to the pandemic and beyond. To the utmost of our capacity, we provided timely and practical assistance and shares our experience with various countries, and also made a financial contribution to the WHO COVID-19 Response Fund. Vietnam is confident that with global solidarity and strengthened multilateralism as a common denominator, we will overcome hurdles ahead and seize new opportunities to build a brighter future envisioned in 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. I thank you for your attention.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Zhang for his